Alright guys, I'm Dominic with Kit Guru and this is the GameMax Moonstone. It's essentially a mid-tower chassis, well-sized mid-tower chassis with 3 tempered glass panels. That's 2 either side and 1 at the front. It also comes with 4 RGB fans, so it's the tempered glass RGB combo we've seen from a few manufacturers like Corsair, Fantex and so on. So it's essentially GameMax's attempt to compete with the likes of those cases. In the UK, it will cost you £109.99, so we'll have to see if that offers good value and whether the features can justify that price. So before diving in, I'll just quickly go over the components used and then we'll start talking about features, things I liked, things I don't like. So first of all, we've got a Ryzen 7 1700 processor. That's being cooled by the Cooler Master Master Liquid 120. The motherboard is an Aorus Gaming AX370 Gaming 5. I've got a SanDisk 120GB SSD around the back. The power supply is a Seasonic Prime 650W Platinum. And I think that's pretty much it, and there's 16GB of DDR4 memory. Actually, the RGB lighting is very successful. As I mentioned, you get 4 fans, 3 in the front and 1 at the back by default. And they all hook up to a small controller around the back of the case, which can control all the lighting effects as well as the speed as an integrated fan controller. You might be thinking, well, if the controller's actually in the case, that's pretty impractical, right? But there's actually, on the front panel, there's actually one button which will let you choose between the different LED effects, while there's also a 3-speed fan controller that you can just flick up and down. So I'll show you it in the B-roll. The RGB lighting is actually very impressive. The LEDs, there's probably about 20 LEDs per fan, and they're really just very bright, the colours are vibrant, and the colours are quite accurate as well. There's also plenty of effects to choose from, such as breathing, colour cycle, static as well. You can choose from various different static options. Because it's all controlled via the control box and the front panel button, you don't get the complete, you can't choose between 16.7 million different hues like you can if it was software based, but it's still a really nifty way of giving you RGB lighting, and compared to what I've seen from other GameMax cases in the past, the lighting on the Moonstone is actually very impressive. And personally, if I were GameMax, I would be seriously thinking about selling that lighting kit separately, because if you think they've managed to include it in a case that only costs £110, the actual cost of just the 4 fans and the controller can't be that much, when you'd pay probably £70–80 for a case like this without the fans included anyway. So first positive is definitely the RGB fans. The colours look really good and I was actually pleasantly surprised with those. Now, I also mentioned the integrated fan controller. That's 3-speed, so obviously you've got low, medium, high, and that's just another little panel, another little slider on the front panel, sorry. That is actually very impressive as well, because it really does tame the noise levels coming from the fans. You might think 4 fans, especially 3 at the front, the case might start getting a bit loud, but even on the highest setting, I would say the fans are pleasantly quiet, and if you've got them on low, they're essentially inaudible. So RGB lighting, integrated fan controller, excellent. Last of all, I want to talk about this little up here, if I can just prise it off. Magnetic dust filter. This is a basic feature, I must admit, but it's very surprising the amount of companies actually don't include one, just to prevent any build-up of dust. And you might be thinking, well, if you've got fans up in the roof anyway, and they're spinning, surely that will prevent any dust getting in because the air pressure is being exhausted upwards. The minute you turn the computer off, however, all sorts of nastiness can come in through the top. So that's the main features that I liked about this case. However, there is a slightly longer list of features that I didn't necessarily like. And we'll start with the overall chassis and the overall build quality. The Moonstone is actually made of a thin steel, SPCC. The overall quality for a case of this price is a bit lacking, I think, when compared to something from Fantex, something from Fractal, something from Corsair, because it just feels a bit cheap. When I was building in it, I didn't have the reassuring sturdiness or the quality that you might expect. Whereas the actual chassis itself is comparatively lacking in features when you compare it to something like, let's say, the Fantex N3 Pro M, for example, which is similarly priced mid-tower. That just gives you a lot more options. For example, in here, you've got you can't remove the drive cage, Fractal give you a choice of top panel covers. You've only got one here. The cable grommets as well, they're very flimsy and cheap. I found they popped out quite a lot when I was trying to push my cables through them. It's just the overall quality is comparatively lacking. Maybe if the case itself was priced more around the £60–70 mark, it would be more forgivable. Now let's talk about a feature it does have, and it's this little mesh section here, just down the side. Now I can understand this is meant to give the case a bit more flair and a bit more pizzazz because you've got the nice little honeycomb mesh. It's meant to look interesting, draw you in a bit. But that's actually where you mount your SSDs. They go around the back. So all that cutout section is doing is giving you a direct view to the back side of your SSDs. I've only installed one, and you can probably see it just here. You can just see all the barcodes and all the numbering on the underside of your SSD, and I just think, why do you want that? I think it looks ugly, and if it was left plain, you didn't have any SSDs there, fair enough, maybe, but it also makes cable management harder because you obviously don't want any cables dragging along that cutout section. So you have to route them around or underneath, and it just complicates matters. So personally, I would prefer just a plain blank panel. My personal favourite thing to do here would be the NZXT cable management bar, which is just a steel bar that protrudes slightly, and you can have your cables coming around it. But other minor complaints I have, this GameMax logo, it's just far too large, I think. It's a bit gaudy, and if you're going for a subtle, understated build, that's probably not what you want to have in there. Radiator space at the top. There's radiator mounts for actually 120 and 140mm radiator, so you could fit a 240, a 280, I think you could even fit a 360 up there. And the mounts are actually offset. However, I was tried to get a 240mm radiator at the top, but I still encountered clearance from the motherboard, despite the fact that the mounting locations are offset. So you can probably see my EPS 8 pin is just up there, and that actually prevented me getting in any 240mm radiator, no matter how thin, despite the fact that the mounting points are offset. And I just find that a bit disappointing. If the case is going to be relatively large for a mid-tower, why not make it add on an extra ½ inch of height, and then you'll be able to fit in any off-the-shelf all-in-one that you want. A little bit of extra thought, a little bit of extra care, and you'd easily be able to fit a top-mounted radiator. But as it is, I've had to go for a 120 at the back, which works fine. Cooling performance is fine, I'll touch on that in a minute. And the last thing I want to talk about is actually the glass. I'm not too keen on the glass, just because it's got such a strong tint. I haven't got it on in a minute, just because it was reflecting my lights like crazy. But if you head over to kitguru.net, you can find the full review of my photos, and you can see that the tint is actually quite dark, and it does makes it, to me, kind of defeats the point of tempered glass. Why have glass side panel if you can't really see through it? Without any lighting, you wouldn't even be able to know there was anything inside because the tint is so strong. The 4 fans do a decent job of illuminating the insides of the case once you've got the side panel on, but realistically you'd probably want at least 2 LED strips, maybe one at the top, one on the side, to fully be able to give you that view. So tinted glass, I prefer just clear. I can understand it's obviously a subjective thing, but for me it defeats the point of tempered glass. Features around the back, it's comparatively basic behind the motherboard tray. There's a lot of cable tie-down points, which I think is nice. Cable management is generally okay. You've got actually a decent amount of space between the area between the motherboard, behind the motherboard tray and the side panel, so I've had no problems getting the glass back on. I can't really complain too much, it's just they haven't really done anything special. There's a few cable tie-down points, which is fine. They've given you a few relatively flimsy Velcro ties rather. So overall, behind the motherboard tray, it's fine. I would have liked to see a movable drive cage actually at the bottom. This is a thing I've been saying probably ever since I've started reviewing GameMax cases. They don't give you removable drive cages. It would help for cable management. If you've got your thicker cables, you can tuck them down there, and it will also help if you've got a really long power supply. Comparatively basic behind the motherboard tray. You've obviously got the honeycomb mesh I mentioned before. I don't like that. That's where the SSDs mount, and they screw directly in. There's no trays. So just before I give my final thoughts on the Moonstone, we'll just touch on cooling and my graphics card, which is the Strix 570 from Asus. That topped out at 75 degrees Celsius, and my Ryzen processor topped out at 45 degrees Celsius. And that's both at 100% loads in AIDA64. You obviously get quite a good airflow from the 3 fans at the front. Single rear exhaust fan also does a decent job of getting the heat out. We know Ryzen's quite cool running anyway, but 120mm will do it absolutely fine. So cooling, very good. 3 fans at the front, excellent. If you're looking for tempered glass and RGB fans, there's actually a relatively cheap way of getting both together. For example, the Corsair 570X, that case is a fair bit more expensive and has similar appeal, similar tempered glass panels. It's got, I think that one has 4 panels, it's got one on the roof instead, but you actually pay a lot less for something like the Moonstone, which still has 4 RGB fans, and I think the RGB fans is probably the standout feature of this case. And you also get the 3 tempered glass side panels. However, the likes of, as I mentioned before, the Enthoo Pro M glass, the Fractal Design Define C, I think they all offer a bit more, they offer more features, they offer definitely stronger and better build quality, something I found a bit lacking with the Moonstone. And overall, they're just a bit more pleasant to build in, while the prices are definitely around the same ballpark. You might be able to find the Fractal and the Phanteks Enthoo Pro M a bit cheaper, but they don't have the RGB fan, so it's a little bit of a trade-off. Overall, if it were me, I would definitely be looking more at one of those cases, one of the more established brands. The GameX Moonstone just has a few niggling issues which kind of pull it down in my estimations. The RGB fans are a definite highlight, and if they were sold separately, I'd definitely be interested in looking at those. But the chassis itself, it just lacks a few options, it lacks finesse, and the overall build quality isn't quite there. So my recommendation would be definitely look at one of those cases. Maybe if you're looking for a cheap way of getting tempered glass and RGB fans together, consider the Moonstone. But overall, I do think there are better cases out there with better build quality, more features, and better ease of use. So I'm Dominic with Kit Guru. This is the GameX Moonstone. If you like this video, give us a like, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also check us out on Twitter, which is @KitGuruPress. Thanks for watching.